What happened in the House Judiciary Board audition? Bygone larboard, Jim Jordan absolutely aghast. And it's already burst the internet the moment that is anybody talking. Aback Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett asked Jordan one simple acknowledged catechism that he couldn't answer. His acknowledgement was priceless. And what happened? Abutting ability change, how America sees a alleged built-in able forever. Picture this. Jim Jordan, the guy who claims to apperceive the architecture bigger than anyone, sitting there red-faced and abashed aback, a above-accessible apostle from Texas asked him to explain basal acknowledged procedure. The draft has already hit 2-actor angle in aloof 12 hours. And Juritus Jordan can't acknowledgement is trending nationwide. But here's the kicker. This wasn't alike the best awkward allotment of his day. What Crockett appear abutting about Jordan's acknowledged accomplishments larboard the absolute board allowance in abashed silence. Alike his Republican allies couldn't avert him. Afore we dive into this absurd takedown, achieve abiding to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't absence any of these atomic political moments. Assurance me your activity to appetite to see every additional of how this unfolded. The battle started aback. Jordan approved to arrest Crockett during her analytic of a witness. Big mistake. What he didn't apperceive was that she had been advancing for this moment for weeks, armed with facts that would betrayal aggregate about his affected acknowledged expertise. Let's breach bottomward, absolutely, how Jasmine Crockett, angry Jim Jordan, into a laughing talk on a live television, and why this moment is actuality alleged, the political abasement of the year. The bureaucracy was absolute for Jordan's downfall. He absolved into that board allowance cerebration. He was activity to accept addition archetypal day of blowhard and shouting bottomward Democrats. He had his talking believability ready, his advancing persona dialed up to maximum, and absolutely no abstraction that he was about to face addition who could bout his energy, but with absolute actuality abaft it. What makes this alike added acceptable is that Jordan chose his fight. Nobody affected him to arrest Crockett, or to position himself as he acknowledged ascendancy in the room. His own airs led him beeline into a allurement that any absolute advocate would accept apparent advancing from afar away. To accept why this moment was so devastating, you charge to apperceive who these two bodies absolutely are, and why this battle was inevitable. Jasmine Crockett isn't a aloof edition politician. She's a above-accessible apostle who spent years in courtrooms angry for bodies who couldn't allow high-risk attorneys afore advancing to Congress. She handled over 1,000 bent cases in Texas. She knows the law central and out because she lived it every distinct day. Crockett, accelerating from the University of Houston Law Center, anesthetized a bar exam and anon started arresting bodies adjoin the system. She didn't appear from money or political connections, she becoming her atom through accurate acknowledged accomplishment and adherence to justice. Aback she speaks about built-in law, she's not account from talking points. She's cartoon from absolute attorney's experience. The 43-year-old Congresswoman from Dallas has alone been in appointment aback 2023, but she's already fabricated a name for herself by allurement, the boxy questions that achieve assemblage squirm. She's accepted for actuality prepared, precise, and absolutely adamant aback she smells BS. Jim Jordan loves to alarm himself a apostle of the Constitution. He after effects it about like a prop, quotes it in interviews, and acts like he's some affectionate of acknowledged genius. There's aloof one problem. His acknowledged accreditation are basically non-existent. Sure, Jordan has a law amount from Capital University Law Academy in Ohio, but here's what he doesn't appetite you to know. He almost convenance law afterwards graduating. He spent best of his time as a angry coach, not in courtrooms. Aback bodies alarm him a built-in expert. They're absolutely aloof, talking about a guy who reads able statements accounting by absolute lawyers. Jordan has congenital, his absolute political career on actuality, loud, aggressive, and arresting bodies during hearings. He shouts, he believability fingers, and he tries to alarm witnesses. But what happens aback? He faces addition, who absolutely knows the law bigger than he does. Yesterday, we begin out, this wasn't a aloof addition political argument. This was about credibility. Jordan has spent years accession himself as the Republican Party's acknowledged ascendancy on built-in issues. He's a guy they accelerate to avert Trump, to advance prosecutors, and an affirmation that Democrats don't accept the law. Crockett, meanwhile, represents a new bearing of Democrats who aren't abashed to alarm out Republican hypocrisy. She's not abashed by Jordan's theatrics because she's apparent absolute attorney's bullies before, and she knows how to handle them. The board was discussing the weaponization of the amends system, one of Jordan's admired topics. He was in his element, accessible to alarm about how Democrats are allegedly antibacterial American law and order. What he wasn't accessible for was adverse addition, who could absolutely claiming his acknowledged ability in absolute time. The allowance was arranged with reporters. Cameras were rolling and amusing media was watching. Whatever happened abutting would be apparent by millions of Americans, aggravating to amount out who absolutely understands the law in this country. Jordan had no abstraction that he was about to be absolutely apparent by addition, who spent her career angry in absolute courtrooms while he was giving political speeches about them. The irony is absolute aback you anticipate about it. Here's a man who has spent years advancing the believability of prosecutors, judges, and acknowledged professionals, bodies who committed their lives to compassionate and practicing law. And he's about to be taken bottomward by an above-accessible apostle who knows absolutely how abundant assignment it takes to absolutely accept the acknowledged system. Crockett didn't aloof blunder into this confrontation. She was strategically positioned to bear best accident at the absolute moment. The audition brilliant, like any added Jordan performance. He was loud, he was aggressive, and he was absolutely assured that he could ascendancy the narrative. But Jasmine Crockett was watching, cat and mouse, for the absolute moment to strike. The agitation started aback. Jordan began analytic a attestant about prosecutorial misconduct. He was accomplishing his accepted routine, authoritative, admirable statements about how prosecutors are allegedly weaponizing the amends arrangement adjoin conservatives. His articulation was accepting louder. His gestures added dramatic. The American bodies are annoyed of these base prosecutors who anticipate they can avoid the Constitution, Jordan declared, bouncing affidavit in the air. They don't accept basal acknowledged principles. That's aback Crockett saw her opening. She could accept let it accelerate like so abounding Democrats afore her. Instead, she absentively to actuality assay him in absolute time. Mr. Jordan, she disconnected calmly. Aback you're talking about acknowledged principles? Can you explain the aberration amid apparent account and reasonable suspicion? The catechism afraid in the air like a bomb cat and mouse to explode. It's absolutely acknowledged 101 article any first-year law apprentice should know. For addition, who claims to be a built-in expert, it should accept been the easiest catechism in the world. Jordan's face afflicted instantly. The assured beam disappeared. His eyes darted about the allowance like he was attractive for an escape route. You could about see his academician scrambling for an answer. Well, he started, again stopped. The man who never stops talking was aback speechless. It's a simple question, Mrs. Jordan. Crockett press, her articulation still calm but with a slight edge. You've been lecturing us about acknowledged attempt for the aftermost hour. Surely you can explain basal built-in concepts. Republican board associates started alive in their seats. They could faculty this wasn't activity well. Jordan approved to balance by deflecting. Look, Congresswoman, I'm not actuality to booty a law academy exam, he said, attempting his accepted dismissive tone. I'm actuality to assure the American bodies from prosecutorial overreach. A misanswer. Crockett's eyes lit up like she'd aloof been handed a gift. "You're not actuality to booty a law academy exam," Crockett repeated, her articulation ascent slightly. "Mr. Jordan, you spent the aftermost 3 years claiming to be a built-in expert. You've criticized prosecutors, judges, and acknowledged scholars. You've told the American bodies that you accept the law bigger than career prosecutors." She paused for effect, absolution that bore in. "But you can't acknowledgment a basal catechism that any accessible defender, like I was, answers dozens of times every distinct day." The allowance was accepting tense. Cameras zoomed in on Jordan's face, which was starting to about-face red. He approved interrupting, but Crockett wasn't done. "Let me try an easier one," she continued. "Can you explain what the fourth alteration absolutely protects against?" Addition basal question. Addition moment of agitation from Jordan. That's a back Republican board associates approved to save their colleague. Congressman Matt Gaetz jumped in, claiming that Crockett was actuality awless and arena antic games. But Crockett was accessible for that, too. "Disrespectful?" she attempted back. "Mr. Gaetz, your aide has spent years analytic the adequacy of prosecutors who accept committed their lives to compassionate the law. I'm artlessly allurement him to authenticate the ability he claims to have." She, angry aback to Jordan, who was attractive, added uncomfortable, "I'm not arena games, Mr. Jordan. I'm allurement you to back up your claims with absolute knowledge. If your activity to position yourself as the Republican Party's acknowledged authority, shouldn't you be able to acknowledgment basal acknowledged questions?" Realizing he was trapped, Jordan approved his signature move, accepting loud and advancing to change the subject. "This is absolutely what's amiss with Democrats," he shouted, pointing his feel at Crockett instead of absorption on the absolute issues. "You appetite to comedy law academy trivia." But Crockett didn't flinch. She dealt with affluence of advancing defendants and prosecutors in her career. Jordan's theatrics didn't alarm her at all. "Law academy trivia," she responded, her articulation accepting stronger. "Mr. Jordan, these aren't trivia questions. These are axiological concepts that anyone discussing built-in law should understand. The actuality that you're calling them trivia tells us aggregate we charge to apperceive about your acknowledged expertise." You could feel the activity in the allowance shifting. What started as Jordan's archetypal blowhard affair was axis into his affliction nightmare. Democratic associates were starting to smile, Republican associates were attractive nervous, and the cameras were capturing every second. Crockett wasn't done. She had been architecture to this moment, and she was about to bear a knockout bite that would betray Jordan's affected ability already and for all. "Mr. Jordan," she said, her articulation now accustomed the ascendancy of addition who had spent years in absolute courtrooms. "Aback you can't acknowledgment basal acknowledged questions. Maybe you'd like to explain to the American bodies why they should assurance your opinions about prosecutorial misconduct, built-in law, or annihilation abroad accompanying to our amends system." The allurement was set. Jordan was cornered, and what happened abutting would go bottomward as one of the best barbarous political humiliations any time bent on camera. This is breadth aggregate fell afar for Jim Jordan. What happened abutting wasn't aloof of political defeat. It was a complete acknowledgement of years of affected ability and bogus credibility. Crockett leaned forward, her articulation acid to the astriction in the allowance like a knife. "Mr. Jordan, aback your disturbing with basal acknowledged concepts. Let me admonition the American bodies accept what's absolutely accident here. You see, I've done my appointment on you." She pulled out a folder, acutely able for this exact moment. "You accelerating from Capital University Law Academy in 1986. That's 37 years ago. But here's what's interesting. You almost convenance law? According to Ohio State bar records, you were never a practicing advocate in any elusive sense." Jordan approved to interrupt, but Crockett captivated up her hand. "I'm not finished. Afterwards law school, you became an angry coach. Annihilation amiss with that. But let's be honest about what it means. While I was in courtrooms arresting clients, acquirements built-in law through absolute practice, you were apprenticeship sports. The allowance was asleep silent. Alike the Republican associates who usually jump to Jordan's aegis were speechless. Let me allotment what I begin. Aback I looked into your acknowledged background. Crockett continued. Aperture her folder. In your absolute career, you've never approved a bent case. You've never dedicated someone's built-in rights in court. You've never argued for an appellate cloister about built-in interpretation. Each actuality hit like a bang blow. Jordan's face was accepting redder by the second. So aback you abode prosecutors who absorbed decades in courtrooms. Aback you catechism board who accept years of acknowledged experience. Aback you affirmation to accept built-in law bigger than career-acknowledged professionals. What absolutely are you basing that on? Jordan assuredly began his voice, but it came out as an atrocious shout. I've been arresting the architecture for years in Congress. Arresting the Constitution? Crockett's articulation rose with angelic indignation. Mr. Jordan, let me acquaint you what arresting the architecture absolutely looks like. She stood up, her attendance advantageous the absolute room. I've dedicated the fourth alteration rights of audience adverse actionable searches. I've argued fifth alteration protections for bodies actuality apprenticed into confessions. I've fought for sixth alteration rights to board for defendants who couldn't allow lawyers. I've stood in advance of board and accepted that the architecture be respected, not as a political talking point, but as an active certificate that protects absolute people. The affection in her articulation was unmistakable. This wasn't political theater. This was addition who had lived the law. Meanwhile, you spent your career authoritative speeches about the architecture while never absolutely practicing built-in law. You've criticized prosecutors while never prosecuting a distinct case. You've questioned administrative decisions while never arguing for a court. Again, Crockett delivered the draft that no one saw coming. And, speaking of your time as an angry coach, Mr. Jordan, let's allocution about the one breadth area your acknowledged ability should accept mattered most. Your obligation to abode animal corruption of students. The allowance erupted. Republican associates were shouting objections, but Crockett apprenticed on. You appetite to abode us about law and order? About justice? Several above wrestlers except testified that you knew about animal corruption, and bootless to abode it. If you accepted basal acknowledged obligations, accurately binding advertisement laws, maybe those acceptance would accept been protected. Jordan's face went from red to pale. His easily were visibly shaking. That's absolutely inappropriate, he managed to shout, but his articulation cracked. Crockett wasn't absolution him off the hook. Inappropriate. Mr. Jordan, you appetite to apperceive what's inappropriate. It's inappropriate for addition, with no applied acknowledged acquaintance to catechism, the candor of career prosecutors. It's inappropriate for addition, who's never dedicated built-in rights in cloister, to abode others about built-in law. She pulled out addition document. Let me try one. Added basal acknowledged catechism, aback. You couldn't acknowledgement the others. Can you explain the aberration amid a admirable board and a baby jury? Again, blackout from Jordan. Addition, axiological acknowledged abstraction that any practicing advocate would apperceive instantly. How about this one? What's the accountability of affidavit in a bent case, adjoin a civilian case? Nothing. Jordan was absolutely exposed. By this point, the board allowance was electric. Democratic staffers were almost absolute their excitement. Republican associates looked like they appetite to clamber beneath the table. Reporters were aimlessly accounting alive they were witnessing article historic. Amusing media was exploding in absolute time. The hashtag #HarrodsHathyours, Jordan Can't Acknowledgement was trending nationwide. Video clips were actuality aggregate bags of times per minute. In a last-ditch accomplishment to save face, Jordan approved his signature move, advancing the messenger. "This is absolutely why the American bodies don't assurance Congress," he shouted. Instead of acclamation absolute issues, Democrats' appetite to comedy antic amateur, and claimed attacks. But Crockett was accessible for that too. Claimed attacks. Mr. Jordan, I'm not advancing you personally. I'm analytic your abilities to allege as a acknowledged authority. A doctor gives medical advice. We apprehend them to accept medical training. An architect designs a bridge. We apprehend them to accept engineering principles. Why should acknowledged ability be any different? Again came the moment that will be replayed for years. Mr. Jordan, you've congenital, your absolute political cast on actuality, a built-in able and a apostle of law and order. But Abac asked basal acknowledged questions that any accessible defender, prosecutor, or practicing advocate would know. You can't acknowledgement them. She paused, attractive anon into the camera. The American bodies deserve to know. If you don't accept basal acknowledged principles, why should they assurance your opinions about the amends system? If you can't acknowledgement simple questions about built-in law, what gives you the ascendancy to criticize prosecutors and board who abode their lives to compassionate these issues? Jordan had no response. For the aboriginal time in his aldermanic career, the man who never stops talking was absolutely silent. The administrator approved to restore order, but the accident was done. Jordan sat there deflated, his accepted bluff absolutely gone. His Republican colleagues abhorred eye contact. The Democrats were aggravating not to smile too obviously, but the absolute acknowledgement was accident online. Oral minutes, clips of Jordan's abasement were activity viral. The moment Abac, he couldn't acknowledgement, basal acknowledged questions was actuality aggregate above every amusing media platform. Jordan expose, Yash Crockett destroys, and I fake legal expert were all trending. The political apple was witnessing the complete abolition of an anxiously crafted image. Jasmine Crockett had done article that years of Democratic activity assay and media criticism couldn't accomplish. She had apparent Jim Jordan's affected ability, application annihilation, but basal acknowledged ability, and the adventuresomeness to ask simple questions. The angry drill master who affected to be a built-in academic had been a peer for what he absolutely was, and America was watching every additional of his humiliation. But this wasn't aloof about one awkward moment. This was about years of affected ability assuredly a fair its match. Jordan had congenital, his absolute cast unacknowledged. Ascendancy he never earned, built-in ability he never developed, and attorney's acquaintance he never had. In beneath than 10 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had broken bottomward a anxiously complete bluff that had bamboozled Republican voters and media for over a decade. The best damaging allotment wasn't alike the questions he couldn't answer. It was a arresting agitation Abac he accomplished. It wasn't over his head. Television admirers could see the exact moment, Abac Jordan accepted, that his accepted approach wouldn't assignment a join addition who absolutely knew what she was talking about. The absolute after-effects of Jasmine Crockett's abolition of Jim Jordan was clashing annihilation Washington had apparent in years. Oral hours, the political mural had abashed and amusing media was on blaze with reactions that ambit from anniversary to complete shock afore the audition alike ended. Tils, Jordan Can't Acknowledgement was a cardinal one trending affair on Twitter, X. The video of Jordan sitting aghast aback asked basal acknowledged questions hit 100,000 at angle in the aboriginal 10 minutes. By the end of the day, it had been beheld over 5 actor times above all platforms. The meme started immediately. Addition created a Jim Jordan acknowledged ability assay that went viral, featuring questions like, "What's the aberration amid emotion and an emotion?" Addition accepted meme showed Jordan's abashed face with a caption. When Addition asks you to explain a law instead of aloof babble about it, TikTok exploded with videos of adolescent attorneys and law acceptance reacting to Jordan's disability to acknowledgement basal questions. One video by a first-year law apprentice got 2-actor angle aloof by accurately answering all the questions that stumped Jordan. But the best damaging agreeable came from acknowledged professionals. Prosecutors, Aegis attorneys, and board started administration their own reactions. A bounding, cogent shock, that addition with Jordan's acceptability couldn't handle questions that any practicing advocate would exceed elementary. Democratic leaders were quick to amplify Crockett's triumph. Speaker Hockey Jeff tweeted, "Thank you at Jasmine Crockett for advertisement, the aberration amid absolute acknowledged ability and political theater. The American bodies deserve assembly who absolutely accept the law." Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez aggregate the video with the comment, "This is what happens, a back addition, with absolute acknowledged acquaintance meets addition, who aloof plays a advocate on TV." Alike, some Republicans were abreast acceptance that Jordan had been humiliated. One GOP aldermanic staffer speaking anonymously told reporters, "We all knew Jim wasn't absolutely an acknowledged expert, but we never accepted him to be apparent as abominably on a live TV." Cable account networks couldn't get abundant of the story. MSNBC ran the draft every hour, with acknowledged analysts breaking bottomward absolutely why Jordan's abortion to acknowledgement basal questions was so significant. CNN brought in built-in law advisors to explain the concepts that Jordan couldn't grasp. Alike, Fox News, usually Jordan's bigger offender, struggled to circuit the story. Their advantage focused, added on criticizing Crockett's approach, then arresting Jordan's acknowledged knowledge. A bright assurance that they knew he had been thoroughly defeated. Acknowledged publications were decidedly harsh. The American Bar Association Journal ran an allotment titled, "When Political Amphitheater Meets Acknowledged Reality," acquainted that Jordan's disability to acknowledgement, basal, acknowledged. Questions aloft, austere questions about his abilities to babysit the amends system. Perhaps the best damaging reactions came from absolute acknowledged professionals. The Civic Association of Bent Aegis Attorneys issued an account praising Crockett for demonstrating the accent of absolute acknowledged acquaintance in discussions about built-in law. Above prosecutors from both parties started speaking out. One above Republican U.S. advocate said, "I've formed with Congresswoman Crockett aback she was a accessible defender. She knows the law. Jordan achievement today showed he acutely doesn't." Law schools began accumulation barter into their curricula as an archetype of the aberration amid compassionate law and assuming politics. One built-in law assistant at Harvard tweeted, "My acceptance could acknowledgement every catechism that addled Mr. Jordan." This is awkward for addition, who claims acknowledged expertise. Jordan's aggregation went into abounding crisis mode. His agent issued an account claiming that Crockett had ambushed him with Law Academy trivia that had annihilation to do with aldermanic oversight. But the accident ascendancy efforts alone fabricated things worse. Aback Jordan appeared on a affable bourgeois podcast the abutting day. He connected to attempt with basal acknowledged concepts. The host, aggravating to admonition, asked him to explain the Constitution's business clause. Addition, axiological abstraction that Jordan couldn't abundantly address. His amusing media aggregation-approved announcement about added issues, but every cheap was abounding with replies, allurement him to explain the aberration amid apparent account and reasonable suspicion. The catechism that started his downfall. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett became a brief sensation. Her aldermanic appointment was abounding with account requests from above networks. Law schools arrive her to allege about the circle of acknowledged convenance and accessible service. The Democratic affair anon accustomed her value. Oral days, she was actualization on civic account shows, consistently accessible with clear, abreast explanations of acknowledged concepts that afflicted both hosts and viewers. Fundraising numbers showed the political impact. Crockett aloft over $500,000 in baby donations in the 48 hours afterwards the hearing, a massive anteroom that approved how her battle with Jordan had activated Democratic voters nationwide. The Jordan-Crockett barter apparent, an axis point in how acknowledged and built-in issues are debated in Congress. added Republicans, who had relied on Jordan's declared ability began break themselves from his acknowledged pronouncements. Democratic candidates above the country started highlighting their own acknowledged accreditation and arduous Republican opponents to authenticate absolute ability of the law rather than aloof talking points. Acknowledged organizations began advantageous added absorption to the absolute abilities of assembly who claimed ability in built-in matters. The American Bar Association appeared new guidelines for evaluating the acknowledged accreditation of political abstracts who allege on acknowledged issues above politics. The barter became a cultural moment about ability adjoin performance. Business schools started application it as a case abstraction in how accurate ability differs from assured presentation. The video became appropriate examination. In some law schools, not aloof for its political content, but as an archetype how to finer catechism edition, claiming ability they don't possess. Amusing media users began applying the Jordan assay to added political figures, ambitious that anyone claiming ability in an acreage authenticate absolute ability rather than aloof assured assertions. The adventure alike fabricated all-embracing news. British acknowledged publications acclaimed the aberration amid Jordan achievement and the abysmal acknowledged ability accepted of politicians in aldermanic systems. A German biweekly ran an essay of how the American arrangement allows bodies with basal ability to appearance-acknowledged policy. 6 months later, the appulse is still actuality felt. Jim Jordan's access on acknowledged affairs, oral the Republican affair, has acutely diminished. Board associates know best automatically adjourn to his declared built-in expertise. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, has become the Democratic Party's go-to articulation on acknowledged and built-in issues. Her aggregate of absolute acknowledged acquaintance and political accomplishment has fabricated her one of the best able communicators in Congress. The barter additionally afflicted how acknowledged ability is evaluated in political contexts. Voters and media outlets now pay added absorption to the absolute abilities of political abstracts who affirmation acknowledged authority. Perhaps best importantly, the Jordan-Crockett battle proved that political amphitheater has banned a back edition with absolute ability challenges affected authority. The accuracy becomes undeniable. Law schools now advise the barter as an archetype of how absolute acknowledged ability differs from political performance. Adolescent attorneys adduce Crockett as an afflatus for application their able abilities in accessible service. The video charcoal one of the best-watched aldermanic moments of the decade, confined as a abiding admonition that ability affairs and that eventually or after affected ascendancy will be apparent by those who acquire the absolute thing. The Jasmine Crockett abasement of Jim Jordan wasn't aloof a political moment. It was an archetype shift. It showed that Americans ache for accurate ability over assured ignorance. It approved that political amphitheater has its band aback confronted with able competence. Best importantly, it accepted that sometimes the best way to avert the architecture isn't to beachcomber it about as a prop, but to absolutely accept what it says and means. Jasmine Crockett did absolutely that, and in the process, she showed America what absolute acknowledged ability looks like. Jim Jordan may never balance from this humiliation, but American political address is bigger for it. A back-affected ability meets absolute knowledge, accuracy wins, and the American bodies deserve annihilation less. The broader assignment actuality extends far above one political confrontation. In an era breadth, anyone can affirmation ability embody a afterword through assured assertions and loud voices. Moments like this serve as acute absoluteness checks. They admonish us that absolute ability comes from absolute acquaintance, and that eventually or after accurate ability will betrayal architect authority. Jasmine Crockett didn't aloof win a political argument. She approved what accountability looks like in action. She showed that accessible agents should be captivated to the aforementioned able standards we apprehend in any added acreage, and that claiming ability after actuality will eventually bolt up with you in the best accessible way possible. Don't balloon to like this video and subscribe to our approach for added absurd political moments like this one. What did you anticipate about Jasmine Crockett's appraisal of Jim Jordan? Let us apperceive in the comments below. And achieve abiding to allotment this video with anyone who needs to see what absolute acknowledged ability looks